They're all the same, no matter the type. Whenever something floods, it tends to cover up everything else so you can't see it. Almost like a form of obfuscation. No matter if it's water, data packets such as a DDoS attack, or money. When you have a large sum of something being injected within a specific area that's overflowing with abundance, it's hard to tell what's actually going on. But once things tend to recede from the flood, it exposes all of the damage it's done. But we're not here to discuss a broken dam today. No, we're here to expose corruption, lies, and fraud that has been going on for quite some time now. And we're going to start off by discussing the CARES Act 2020. It was passed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was to help relieve issues a bunch of different companies and businesses were having by being shut down, particularly small businesses. But we're going to talk about one specific component here of the CARES Act. Not go through every single detail. It's a very long, boring, and dry document. And we're going to talk about Section 5001. All right? Applicability of the restrictions on the ESF during national emergency. The ESF is the Exchange Stabilization Fund. And it states here in its law, Section 131 of the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008 shall not apply during the national emergency concerning the novel coronavirus disease outbreak declared by the President under the National Emergencies Act. So what is Section 131 of the Emergency Act, or Emergency Economic Stabilization Act? Well, it's right here. But you have to realize the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act was passed in response to the recession of 2008 to deal with that crisis. And in that section here, Section 131, this reimbursement, the Secretary shall not reimburse the Exchange Stabilization Fund established under the Section 5, shall reimburse Section 5302 of Title 31 for any funds that are used for the Treasury Money Market Funds Guarantee Program. That was a program passed in 2008 for the United States money market mutual funds industry, essentially the Federal Reserve and other banks, from funds under this chapter. Limit on use of exchange stabilization funds. The Secretary is prohibited from using the Exchange Stabilization Fund for the establishment of any future guarantee programs for the United States money market mutual fund industry. They said never again. We'll never ever do this again. And right there in the CARES Act, they wiped away that policy, wiped away that law that strictly stated don't do this again, and just said we're going to ignore this shit because who gives a fuck? And we're going to do what the hell we want because it makes people a lot of fucking money. Editorial references, notes and references. All right. It talks about what it's referring to in the CARES Act here. Well, in the Stabilization Act. And here's some notes on the other additionals from the CARES Act down here. You see December 31st, 2020, blah, blah, blah. Dates, things, we're redoing this. Be limited to the guarantee. Restock the ESF. ESF? Yeah. Exchange Stabilization Fund. Sorry, I'm not a banker. I don't know all of this jargon. And I slur like a retard. So they reactivated a policy that was told to never come back. All right? And what that policy does is permits the Federal Reserve to engage in quantitative easing. All right? This is from April 9th, 2020. The Federal Reserve on Thursday took additional actions to provide up to $2.3 trillion in loans to support the economy. This funding will assist in households and employees of all sizes and bolster the ability of state and local governments. Really? I feel so bolstered and empowered as a local and state government right now. Local governments to deliver critical services during the coronavirus pandemic. Our country's highest priority must be to address this public health crisis, providing care for the ill and limiting the farther spread of the virus. The Federal Reserve Board Chair Jerome H. Powell. The Fed's role is to provide as much relief and stability we can during this period of constrained economic activity, and our actions today will help ensure that the eventual recovery is as vigorous as possible. The Federal Reserve's role is guided by its mandate from Congress to promote maximum employment and stable prices, along with its responsibilities to promote the stability of the financial system. In support of these goals, the Federal Reserve is using... I don't have the fucking wig on. Fuck it. Is using full range of authorities to provide powerful support for the flow of credit on the economy. The actions of the Federal Reserve is taking today to support employers of all sizes. Bolster things, do that. Here we get into the programs. Bolster the effectiveness of the Small Business Administration Paycheck Protection Program by supplying liquidity to participating financial institutions through term financing backed by PPP loans to small businesses, blah, blah, blah. The PPP provides loans to small businesses so they can keep their workers on the payroll. The Paycheck Protection Liquidity Facility will extend credit to eligible financial institutions that originate PPP loans, taking the loans as collateral at face value. And there's some other ones that they implemented here. That's just the CARES Act talking about it. The PMCF, SMCF, TAF. TAF was something that was implemented in 2008. Okay. And the MSLP. Well, I guess that's the MLF. Okay, whatever. Hey!
Are you working?
No. The point is, all of those programs that the Federal Reserve enacted are engaging in quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is when the Federal Reserve purchases and holds assets. So they buy up debt from other people. MBRs is what they essentially mostly buy in other things. And this allows them to directly target specific industries, companies, and I guess systems, economic systems within the US to make them, to drop down their interest rate. Because it essentially functions in the same manner as repurchase agreements, where you give the banks more money and buy T-bills from them, and that way they have more money in their reserves so they can push out more debt. It's not the fact that the bank has more money that interest rates for mortgages or cars or airplanes goes down. No. The interest goes down because there's increased debt within the market. And that's essentially what they're trying to do. But the specific program we're going to focus on here for a bit here is the PPLF from the Federal Reserve. This was backing up the PPP program from the SBA. The PPP program allowed the Small Business Administration, to push out a lot of loans to small businesses that were shut down. The SBA was created in 1952 by Eisenhower for some economic reasons and economic responses for the disaster and recovery from World War II. And later updated and changed into being officially announced as the SBA. You can find all of your information you want on it on Wikipedia if you want, but we don't use Wikipedia here. No, we lose the spot I was on of the official document that set up the SBA. The principal duties of a commercial market representative employed by the administrator of the SBA and reporting to the senior official appointed by the administrator with responsibilities under all that bullshit and all those things. And these are their duties and responsibilities. The main activity the SBA engages in: helping prime contractors to find small business concerns that are capable of performing subcontracts. B, for contractors awarded contracts containing the clause described blah blah blah. Counseling on the responsibility the contractor to maximize subcontracting opportunities for small business concerns. Instruction on method and tools to identify potential subcontractors that are small business concerns. Assistance to increase awards and subcontractors that are small business concerns through visits, training, reviews, and of past performance. Providing counseling on small business concerns may promote the capacity of the small business concern to contractors awarded contracts containing clause blah blah blah. Really a bunch of boring law shit. I guess the last one. Conducting periodic reviews of contractors awarded contracts containing the clause described blah. So you got contractors subcontracting to small businesses, but what? Who are these contractors and what are they subcontracting? Well, these partners, as the SBA puts it, are banks, credit unions, and other lenders such as BlackRock or Vanguard are the contractors, and what they're contracting out are loans, obviously, because they're credit unions. They're giving out credit and pushing out debt. No surprise saying that this whole administration was set up and used during COVID for this. And there's another key detail here about that administration, up more towards the top. Top of, I guess I'll show you the top. 15 U.S. Code 633, Small Business Administration. And that is B. B, appointment of administrator, deputy administrator, and associate administrator duties, blah, blah, blah. Appointment, preparation of database, economic indices. Computer security, I guess, is now on there. And it states right here on the top, the management of the administration shall be vested in an administrator who shall be appointed from civilian life by the President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, and who shall be a person of outstanding qualifications. So, it's a non-government administration. Civilians are being hired and appointed in these positions by the executive branch and approved by Congress, in the same fashion as the Federal Reserve. So those are the two key details about how the inner functions of the Small Business Administration actually works. And why it's important is because even though it's civilian and it's private, it's actually also funded by the federal government. Here we have the U.S. Small Business Administration's fiscal year 2025 Congressional Budget Justification and fiscal year 2023 Annual Performance Report. And there's several other documents in here. So go over their financing and funding for the Small Business Administration, so I can prove to you without a shred of doubt that this non-government administration is fully and completely financed by the federal government. Here we have Table 5 for the summary of charges of agency operating budget. Okay. These are things they need funding for so they can do their jobs and hire people and pay for people to do all their things. And they're asking for 5, oh gosh. Probably should zoom in, shouldn't I? They're asking for $558 million for 2025. I don't know what they got last year. I didn't care. It didn't matter. So they get funded, and all their funding is completely through the federal government. They have no other way to pay for things because they're not a profit business. And not only are they just, making the government pay for everything that they do while working with banks to make money, is they also charge the government for their IT investment. Oh, and to invest in their IT and the request this year, they request another $300 million. Pretty funny, pretty ridiculous. So they're requesting, just close to $1 billion to run some non-government administration. But there's more to the SBA than this. Because if you didn't hear, there was a big stickler about a lot of things that were happening within the SBA through the PPP program right around COVID. Criminals have stolen nearly $100 billion in COVID relief funds. Secret Service says. Now wait a minute. $100 billion of the 2.4 trillion or whatever it was. No, it was probably like 8 trillion, 7 trillion they invested in response for COVID-19. 100 billion of that just kind of vanished, went in the air, and the Secret Service are investigating it. Criminals have stolen close to $100 billion in the pandemic relief funds, the U.S. Secret Service said Tuesday. See all the different things? 3.5. The government has shelled out about 3.5 trillion in COVID relief funds since nearly 2020. This article was 2021. They kept on investing more. Hence how it came up to like 7.5 trillion dollars. And apparently, the Secret Service, which specializes in financial fraud in addition to its better-known role in the presidential protection, you know what? They protect him from bullets, and they protect his funds and his finances, making sure if he does anything dirty and tricky that it's done right so he doesn't get caught. What a surprise that the biggest fraud in the U.S. has an agency that specializes in fraud working for him and underneath him. They're probably better at protecting fraud than they are actually protecting presidents from getting shot, these days at least. So we have that. It came out, and they gave a little bit report on their PDF that we were looking at earlier on these events that unfortunately unfolded with their misuse and distribution of funds and loans. Because if you can imagine, there's a lot of people that aren't happy about this, and maybe even some in Congress, but I doubt their numbers are I'd be surprised if their numbers aren't limited. And here we have the U.S. Small Business Administration Office of Inspector General recently established and created within the administration for their fiscal year 2025 Budget Justification. And we're going to zoom on down to page 218. To the Pandemic Response Oversight section. SBA was authorized to administer approximately $1.2 trillion, primarily through the PPP and COVID-19 Emergency Injury Disaster Loan Program, the Shutter Venue Operators Grant, and the Restaurant Revitalization Fund to help mitigate the economic damage from the pandemic. Executive and legislative actions at the onset of the pandemic were designed to quickly address the economic fallout, which allowed the SBA to reduce and eliminate key internal controls and rely on self-certification of eligibility to expedite aid. Sounds like a problem, self-certification. In turn, OIG quickly pivoted to provide oversight of the SBA's pandemic response programs. So that's a little bit of an introduction to their OIG, their Office of Inspector General. And you know what? We can finish reading that a little bit more here. The OIG knew at the start of the pandemic that the SBA would face a delicate balancing act of preventing widespread fraud while ensuring timely disbursement of relief funds to Americans in immediate need of assistance, because we shut down the country and scared and fear-mongered everyone into being afraid of the evil disease. Our concern was how the SBA was going to quickly deliver capital to qualifying small businesses without having first established the internal controls necessary to decrease fraud risk. No shit. Just stating the obvious of what happened. And let's go to the part on the obvious that happened. As they put it, the biggest fraud in history, $100 billion. How could we ever recover from this devastating result? Which the OIG actually agreed on. Even with these early warnings, SBA internal control environment contributed to the bringing about the biggest fraud in a generation. It was immediately clear that the pandemic relief efforts had drawn the attention of unscrupulous and greedy criminals. All those greedy criminals like the banks. In fact, the first criminal charges of PPP fraud were announced on May 5th, 2020. Approximately 1 month after the program was initially authorized by Congress. So immediately the program was a complete failure and a disaster. But you don't need their statement to tell you that, or my announcement, because it was obvious from the fucking start. So let's take a look at the fraud landscape that the OIG of the SBA are currently dealing with. Our COVID-19 pandemic of the EIDL and PPP loan fraud landscape, released June 23rd, 2023, provided policymakers with an understanding of the fraud perpetrated against the SBA, and also provided the OIG the insight necessary to prioritize and lead investigative efforts across the nation, particularly in task forces and strike forces led by the U.S. Department of Justice. Because who's ever worried about the Department of Justice not delivering any justice? That's never happened before. Using OIG investigative casework, prior OIG reporting, advanced data analytics, additional review procedures, we estimated the SBA dispersed more than $200 billion potential fraudulent COVID-19 EIDL and PPP loans. Okay? But wait, we were told the PPP loans had $64 billion of fraud in it. I mean, we were told 100 billion, but now they're saying 64 billion? 64 billion only comes from the PPP program. You know, that's not the first time they actually lowered it. Nope. They were dropping it throughout it, but not telling us about, well, the actual serious fraud that happened. You know, the real concerning fraud. Because 64 billion, that's hardly 200 billion. Even though we were told earlier it was 100 billion. And, you know, later on, biggest fraud in a generation, the looting of the COVID relief plan fund known as PPP. The official in charge of COVID relief tells NBC News' Lester Holt that programs like PPP were structured in ways that were an invitation for fraudsters and hucksters alike. And you see the top. Many who participated in what prosecutors are calling the largest fraud in U.S. history, the theft of hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer money intended to help those harmed by coronavirus pandemic. Oh, 800 billion invested into the PPP, 80 billion here in fraud, 64 billion now. It just keeps going down, down, down. So where did the other $4 billion that was sent to the SBA actually go? We were told in the beginning of the report that they were giving $1.2 trillion to respond to COVID and to distribute out to different small businesses. But the PPP was only 800 billion. Well, the other portion of it mostly came from the emergency injury and disaster loan, around 390 billion. So that gets us up to our 1.2 trillion. If you can do the math. So all of that money went there. But how much fraud did the EIDL have in their program and its many failures? Well, we'll go back to our report. And we see here 64 billion in the PPP loan, $136 billion was frauded from the EIDL. 136 billion. Yet they were just making all of these articles and things about the PPP because they knew it wasn't as bad and they maybe hyped it up more. And they're like, well, we'll just keep reducing it. But the EIDL, out of $390, $390 billion, 136 billion was frauded out, handed out for free to people that didn't actually need it. What a load of fucking bullshit. Are you kidding me? A third of the program failed? That's a disaster. That's horrendous. How can the FBI and all these other people just let this go? How can people in Congress just let this happen? You know, the Small Business Administration isn't associated with the government. They should be criminally charged for this. They're not part of the government. They're paid by the government to do things. They're not only paid, but they're invested with an infinite money glitch for everyone working there, an opportunity to get a lot of experience in the field high up in some sort of stupid institution whose only purpose is to engage in fraud. Now, how does the OIG of the Economic Injury Disaster Fund? Okay, I was saying emergency. I don't know all the jargon for all these banks and things. Who cares? We're just doing a quick little video on it. But they have an idea for responding to and stopping this from happening again. And it's quite the joy. What do you do when people are lying and being sneaky and being tricky about their money and things? Well, you question the one people who seem to be allowing this and addressing it, being like, you know what, this SBA thing here, this SBA, they're just a bit too corrupt maybe. Maybe we need to reassure them some safety and concerns that it's okay, you can talk to the government, we're your friend. You can trust us to tell us about all the fraud that's going on. The OIG Whistleblower Program. Pursuant to the Whistleblower Protection Coordination Act, the OIG has designated a whistleblower coordinator within the Office of Counsel to educate the SBA employees about prohibitions on retaliation for whistleblowing, as well as employees' rights and remedies if anyone retaliates against them for making a protected disclosure. In addition, the National Defense Authorization Act. Be snitches. We need government snitches within our non-government organization that we pay, fund, created, and permit to this day to still exist and utilize. Not only just utilize, but they want to create updates for their for their network, and hire cybersecurity experts for their IT department. It's just ridiculous. Lastly, but not least, we have to have the Office of Inspector General for the SBA's performance and statistical accomplishments. The good stuff. See all the success they've had. During the fiscal year 2021, the OIG provided historic exponential return on investment to taxpayers with $4.2 billion in dollar accomplishments. Oh, we discovered $4.2 billion of fraud in 21. 22, we got another 4.8. 2023, another 4.2, making our total 13.2 divided by 200. They've discovered a little over 6%. Excellent work, OIG. Great job, SBA. Fucking phenomenal work. It really didn't just blow up and break apart in your face. No, that definitely didn't happen from the response from COVID. This most certainly, it's not that the SBA is fraudulent, it's the fraudulent people around the SBA that's working with them who are taking out the loans. It's the customer's fault, not the bank's fault, not their partners. No. All I see this as being is no different than the Fed. It functions in the same way. They're put into power in the same way. The only difference is the SBA is funded by the federal government. The Federal Reserve is funded through its functionality. It doesn't ask for additional funds. It collects on interest, and it uses that to run its operations and pay its banking stockholders. Because the Federal Reserve is also a cabal of banks. Just as the SBA is, the SBA just merely calls them partners, while the Federal Reserve calls them part owners. Real clarifications and differences between the two, surely. So, could go on for who knows how long about these stupid things. But at the end of the day, sometimes all you can do is go out for a hike, get into the woods, and explore some of the chaotic things that had unfold in our world, just for your liking. So I've been the King's Fool, and I hope you all have a good one.